Harsh, before I conclude the conversation, I would want to request you to leave our viewers with some recommendations now. And I want to begin, I just pulled up your book, which is A New Idea of India by Harsh Madhusudan and Rajiv Mantri. It's a fantastic book, and a lot of ideas also we have discussed today from the book. But I want to also pick your brains and please share some books, articles, or other resources that you want to share for young Indians in particular, because there are a lot of our viewers who are just coming out of colleges, who are trying to make sense of the world. They're trying to make sense of the Indian economy, governance, civilization. So if you could share a few resources with them.
No, well, I mean, there are so many. Let me open my Kindle and see the books I've been reading of late.
Absolutely.
So let's divide it into like two parts: economic and civilization.
Yes.
Okay. So I think economic. It's very important to study economic history,
right?
Because I think ultimately history is the real test of theory. Unlike the sciences, although economics has a physics envy and pretends to be a science, there are no lab experiments in economics, right? It's ultimately what happened, and all counterfactuals are basically speculations beyond a point. So I would encourage people to read anything by Robert Allen, Bob Allen. He has a very short economic history. He has longer books. He has a very interesting take on why the British became rich,
right?
Including state capacity, including tariffs, but also the fact that they got lucky geographically and the wages were high and innovation happened. So I think anything by Bob Allen is very important. There is a very good book by Prasannan Parthasarthi called Why Europe Became Rich and Asia Did Not. So if you don't understand the great divergence, it's difficult for you to kind of wrap your head around the great convergence. Speaking of the great convergence, a very good book called, by that name itself, called The Great Convergence by Richard Baldwin. So he actually goes into the part about technologies and how, therefore, in the 21st century, as we go on decade by decade, it is more likely that the world will become more equal on a cross-country basis, not necessarily in an intra-country basis. Anything by Ray Dalio is very much worth reading, whether you agree or disagree about his views. For example, he made some strange comments about China recently, but Ray Dalio, one of the world's leading hedge fund managers, the latest book is The Changing World Order. I think on the civilizational side, I've been reading a lot about trying to understand this kind of who we are, this polytheist versus monotheist framework. There's a very good book called God Against the Gods by Jonathan Kirsch. Okay. Then I mentioned Jan Assmann, The Mosaic Distinction. Okay. So if what we are seeing right now, very tragic incidents happening in the Harmandir Sahib. Yes. These are basically downstream effects. So whenever somebody says ideas are silly, well, they are silly in the short term, but in the long term, ideas are all that matter. So I think there is a book specifically on the evolution of the Sikh faith by Harjot Oberoi. I'm forgetting. It's a very expensive book. It's not available in India. So maybe somebody in North America can look into it. I think the Francis Fukuyama's Origins of Political Order is a very good book. I think Fukuyama is always getting a lot of flack because he said something 30 years ago that history has ended. And now all geopolitical books quote Fukuyama saying that, he was wrong. And he was wrong then, but his views have evolved dramatically a lot since then. I think that there are many books. I love reading about the evolution of technology as well. Let me just quickly look if there's one or two good books. I would highly recommend any book by Sanjeev Sanyal. Absolutely. I would highly recommend any book by Vikram Sampath. The last two books on Savarkar are very important, and the kind of opposition he faced in Ratnagiri when he was trying to reform Hindu society and trying to basically dilute caste. He faced a lot of opposition. I actually liked Ram Madhav's The Hindutva Paradigm because the RSS historically is not produced books and literature of its own. So I thought the book was very well researched. Maybe it could have been edited more tightly, but I really thought the book was lovely. And the final two books I would end by saying is, one is The Invention of Religion in Japan. And I think it's an important book because in a way, because we live in a world dominated by Abrahamic religions, we have been forced to understand religion in a way that was not in consonance with their own civilizational ethos. Now you can't go back completely, but what happened when the American steamboats went to Japan and they said, "What is your religion?" And they really had no translation for that. Just like religion does not translate to dharma.
Yes.
And they were actually forced to come up with state Shinto in a way.
Right.
Earlier, Shinto and Buddhist were very, very much intertwined in Japan. In fact, even today in the census, if you ask them, Shinto and Buddhist numbers add up to more than 100%.
Right.
Uniquely in global censuses. One last book I would mention is, this one is more technical, so let's go. Let's just I would say, well, let's go with another book on the non-economic side. This is a good book to finish with. It's called The Darkening Age.
Yes.
By Catherine Nixie, I think.
Nixie.
So she speaks about how basically kind of what we now call paganism collapsed in the Roman Empire and the long, dark medieval ages. And how basically Christianization of Europe was as coercive as, various Islamic conversions in other parts of the world later on, and how that has been whitewashed in history, which is very much like Edward Gibbon's the rise and fall, the fall and decline of the Roman Empire. So I would highly encourage watching The Darkening Age. There is a movie, if you don't want to read a book like that, called Agora, which is about fundamentalist Christians attacking this Greek place of learning in Alexandria, I think, which is Greek Egypt, which I thought was a very fascinating book. So it's very important, because I always think in terms of religion in universalist terms. When I think of Sanatana Dharma, I think we are one version of that. Because if we are not one version, if we are all of it, then it cannot be Sanatan. It cannot be universal. It cannot be timeless. So I'm of late very fascinated by these other kind of what are known as primary religions by Jan Assmann, and then he called the Abrahamic religions to be secondary religions. Right. So I'll just let it be at that.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.